thank you.
Yeah, they are. They are.
Well, I'm so glad you had me here today. I'll share some stuff. I was gonna kind of do like mental health 101 a little bit, and then tell you about my organization and then some of the programs that we offer. So this is a whole new setup that I'm not used to. This is kind of neat. I feel so special right now because I actually see the next slide too. So
now you are with
NAMI. I'm with NAMI.
And are you Judy?
And I'm Judy.
Okay.
Yep. And so
And what is NAMI?
NAMI is the National Alliance on, here, let me go to the next slide.
Okay, I see it.
There we go. Here's NAMI. Yes, we're the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and we're the largest grassroots organization that supports families and individuals that have a mental health condition. And I'm part of the local affiliate, so we're called NAMI Piedmont County. So we cover York, Lancaster, and Chester counties. And we've been around for about 20 years. Again, we're grassroots, so we are organized by, basically family members and individuals that have mental health conditions. We are not professionals. So a lot of us got involved because we have experience with our own mental health condition or our loved one's mental health condition. I just so happen to get involved with NAMI because of my son. He has autism and he also has a anxiety disorder. So that's how I started getting involved with NAMI. So let's talk a little bit about what mental health conditions are. The key thing I like to point out to people is that they are medical illnesses just like any other physical illness. So if somebody is having symptoms, psychosis, they should go to the doctor. Because if you're having a heart attack, that's what you do, you go to the hospital. It's the same thing with a mental health condition. So they should not be treated any differently. They are conditions that will change how a person thinks, acts, and feels. They are extremely common. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, and they are treatable. The one thing that we also stress, I do a lot of presentations in the high schools and the middle schools. So I tell kids, it's not anybody's fault that you have this mental health condition. And it also does not have to limit what you're able to achieve in your lifetime. So here are some of the symptoms. And at some time or other, we might have some of these symptoms. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we have a mental health condition. So it's when there is severity and duration. Usually we tell people if they're having some of these symptoms that last more than 2 weeks, then maybe they should have them checked out. Because, feeling sad or withdrawn, that's a very appropriate response for somebody. If you lose somebody that's close to you, that's a very appropriate response. But there's a big difference between that and somebody that's clinically depressed who can't get out of bed for, months on end. Severe out of control risk-taking behaviors, sudden overwhelming fear for no reason. My son sometimes would have, he would have a fear of, I don't see them in here, but he would have a fear of those fire alarm things that in rooms, that say fire and they're red. He was so afraid that they were going to go off. So that was very hard for him to keep himself together when he saw something like that when he was very young. He's 22 now, so that, isn't a problem anymore. But also severe mood swings that can cause problems in relationships, drastic changes in personality or sleep patterns. Sometimes, again, like a person that lives with bipolar, they might have episodes where they are not sleeping for days on end, like maybe 5 days. They won't sleep. But then the converse can happen where maybe they'll sleep for 20 hours a day and still be exhausted and can't get out of bed. Extreme difficulty concentrating, staying still, maybe somebody that lives with ADHD or maybe even anxiety. Intense worries or fears. Not eating, throwing up, using laxatives to lose weight, anorexia or bulimia, repeated use of drugs or alcohol, and then trying to harm oneself or making plans to do so. So is it all in their head? Well, mental illnesses are neurobiological brain disorders, and they're basically chemical disorders in the brain. And as I said before, they're medical illnesses. And these disorders can be controlled. As I said before, they're treatable. You know, maybe it's medication, maybe it's therapy, support groups, and also, you know, creating empathy in the classroom and in the family. And mental illnesses, they are defined actually by the DSM-5, which is the psychiatric, I guess, Bible, so to speak. You know, it has a list of all the diagnoses and what, I guess, the symptoms are and different things. Because there's, you know, if a doctor is looking at it, sometimes they're splitting hairs with some of these things. I have a booklet that I will give to you after we're done that has some of them listed, and you can look through some of them. Because there's differences in how some of these mental health conditions present themselves in youth, and then when also they're in high school, when they're high school age. So, you know, anxiety is going to look differently, or depression is going to look differently in a young person versus a person that's in their teens. So, so how many of you know of somebody that lives with a mental health condition? So, yeah. You'd be surprised, you probably know somebody that does.
Well, yeah, I know almost everybody I know is on some type of antidepressant.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know if it's mental illness.
Yeah.
You know.
Mm-hmm. Well, some of the common mental illnesses, you know, I've talked about some of them already, but there's anxiety disorders, there's ADHD, bipolar, borderline personality disorder, eating disorders, depression, OCD, which is obsessive compulsive, and then, you know, schizoaffective and schizophrenia. Some of those are more involved, but those are just some of the more common ones that we hear about.
What's a seasonal affective disorder?
Seasonal affective disorder is depression, but it usually affects people more this time of year. So when the seasons change,
It gets
like,
darker, yeah.
So I know that,
Like up in the north where they're kind of.
Just
or
no, there's
anywhere.
even people
Just-
anywhere, yeah. I mean, it might, you know, in some places, like, in some countries, like, say, Finland, well, yeah,
Yeah.
well, you know, but they have greater rates of depression because of the fact that there's a lack of sunshine and,
Right.
you know.
I
in
have
Alaska,
heard that.
yeah. But I know of, like, some of the folks that work with me, like, I know several of them who live with bipolar. They said a lot of times when the seasons change, for some people it's this time of year, but some other people it's in the spring where they start, their symptoms kind of increase. And so it's just kind of interesting that they're kind of cyclical. So,
I have a sister that's bipolar and severely bipolar. Let me
Mhm.
tell you, something to live with. And she goes off her medication. It's a problem with a lot of bipolar. A lot of these is
The seasonal.
well, not necessarily seasonal, but they go through manic or depressive stages, and they think they don't need the medication anymore,
Yeah,
Or they self-medicate.
or they self-medicate.
or they self-medicate, yeah.
She's also an alcoholic too. So.
yeah, very common.
Dual diagnosis. Right?
Yep, very, very, very common.
Yeah.
So just to give you some facts, you know, so approximately 1 in 4 adults, so 25%,
Wow.
have a diagnosable mental health condition.
Is that different compared to the rest of the world? 1 in 4?
1 in 4 in the U.S. Now, I looked, you know, it's funny because I was looking into Finland one day, and I think it was, but they have really high rates of suicide in Finland and
Yeah.
also alcoholism. But again, that's you know, an area where they don't see the sun as much. You know, so maybe there's some vitamin D. Like I know that I have very low vitamin D, and that affects your depression. It also affects. I'm getting off track here a little bit, but it affects also your just even your sleep. If you're not getting enough, you're not going to sleep as well. And here's an interesting fact for you all, because you're going to be dealing with youth. 1 in 5 youth between the ages of 13 and 18 has a diagnosable mental health condition. So, again, so children, 1 in 5 have diagnosable mental health condition. You know, obviously parents and teachers can be overwhelmed by these children. Here's some interesting facts though. 50% of the adult cases said these people had symptoms actually by the age of 14. And then 75% had symptoms by the age of 24. So a lot of times, a lot of these illnesses are presenting themselves in the teens and into the early adulthood. And
Very
so,
often, you talk about the DSM-5, when I worked with kids, I'd have someone like bipolar, put a little rule out because they wouldn't diagnose it yet, but they were presenting with it. And they kinda knew, so they knew it was coming.
And so the thing is like I said, I talk to the kids a lot about, you know, if you're having symptoms, you should go and talk to somebody, because sometimes if you're not getting treatment, it can turn into something even more serious, you know, and then there could be more, there could be self-medication, and there's drug and alcohol abuse. And also to, you know, we're talking about suicide. So, you know, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death, but it is our 2nd cause of death for youth between the ages of 15 and 24. And 90% of those people that die by suicide had some form of a mental health condition. And then there's also a fact here about veterans. Each day about 22 veterans die per day. So I'm going to do a little quiz for you. So, true or false, there's no hope for people with mental health conditions?
False.
As I said, there's a lot of treatments out there. And I really believe that we're at the tip of the iceberg with some of these things. I mean, we're trying to make a lot of progress with, you know, treatments and strategies. My personal feeling is that we really need to attack some of these things really early on with kids, that they learn positive coping skills, because that's really where I think that if they had something to latch on to, that it would be a lot better. Even if they do come from really hard circumstances, I think that we can give them some things that can help them. Okay, so here's another one. Mental health conditions cannot affect me. False, yeah. They're very common, 1 in 4 for adults, and they affect almost every family in America, and they don't discriminate. Okay, next one. Mental health conditions are brought on by a weakness of character. Mental illnesses are basically a combination of biological and environmental factors. So, and sometimes, you know, maybe in some families they might have a gene, but it may not be expressed in one person, but it will be in another. So, people with mental health conditions are violent and unpredictable.
True.
Well, actually false. In reality, a lot of the things we hear in the news, yes, are people that maybe have mental health conditions, but they're no more likely to be violent than another person. In reality, some of these folks are more likely to be the victims of
Can I ask
violence.
something? Wonder if they're not on medication. I mean, will that cause violence?
And you know what? That's exactly what I say to the kids. I heard this from somebody else, and I take credit for it. I heard it in a presentation, but I say that mental illness doesn't cause violence, but non-treatment can cause violence. You know, so if somebody isn't being properly taken care of for their condition, then maybe violence might, you know, come into play. But, you know, we know a lot of people that live with mental health conditions, and most of them, you know, the majority of them are not violent. So this is a collage of some famous folks that I usually show the kids because they know most of these people. And they all are successful in their field, and they all live with a mental health condition. And some of them are very serious, like Demi Lovato, who's in the corner there. She lives with bipolar. And Brandon Marshall, who's the football player, which I think he's with the Jets now, so I think that's when he was with the Broncos or whatever. He lives with borderline personality disorder. And I can go through the rest if you want me to.
I would like to know.
Yeah, I'll just go through them all. I'll just go through them all at the top row. So I said Demi Lovato, bipolar, Brandon Marshall.
Was
She is a singer.
Singer.
She's a singer. She's a singer. She was also in some Disney movies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she's
pretty big right now.
yeah, she's really big. She's pretty big right now. She's been a huge advocate also for individuals that live with mental illness. Brandon Marshall, borderline personality disorder. Also, he's been a very big advocate and has done some interviews for USA Today, and I think he and his wife have a foundation. Adele.
Can you
Yeah.
define the difference between borderline and bipolar? Because I've heard they sound,
Very similar.
yeah.
The best I can tell you, because I'm not a doctor,
Mhm.
but the best I can tell you as far as, well, bipolar a lot of times deals with the manic and the depressive.
Mhm.
But a person that lives with borderline personality disorder, a lot of times they have difficulty with understanding, well, norms, you know, like how one should act in a certain situation. So they might underreact or overreact in a
Okay.
situation. And from what I understand, you know, I don't really know Brandon Marshall's play, but apparently, like, sometimes if there was a bad play, like, he would just go over the top, sometimes reacting to maybe a call, you know, and just not knowing how to act in that situation. So that's kind of like,
So that wouldn't be lack of self-control, that would be.
yeah, I mean, it almost seems like lack of self-control, but like, yeah, but a situation, he's just not, you know. And I know another young lady that lives with borderline, and yeah, she just overreacts to things that, you know, to a much higher degree than maybe.
And they can't
I
control
think
it.
the-
And they just
the
can't
key issue
control it.
is that they can't process that it's wrong.
Mhm.
You know, they just don't, where you
Right.
and I might, well, okay, that may.
I know I'm over the top, but I'm so mad, I'm just keep going.
Right.
But they
Right.
really can't
They don't-
change
they
it.
don't-
Well, yeah,
understand.
like maybe like the message gets sent, but they can't retrieve it. You know, like sometimes like, and that's a lot too with autism sometimes,
Mhm.
is that the message gets sent, but you know, sometimes we have that second where we can say, okay, but they just keep on going. They
Right.
just can't pull it back. Adele, yeah, I don't know enough about I don't really know too much about borderline, but that's what I do know. Adele, she actually has postpartum depression and generalized anxiety disorder. Ruby Rose, she's in the show Orange is the New Black. She has
Mhm.
depression. JFK, depression, ADHD, I think also anxiety. And then that last gentleman is Channing Tatum. He has ADHD. And then the next row is Margaret Cho and Serena Williams live with depression. Adam Levine, he's a singer and he's on
Right.
that show The Voice, I guess.
Mhm.
ADHD. Halle Berry, depression. Royce White, anxiety. Lady Gaga, PTSD and depression. And then Meta World Peace. Yeah, Ron Artest, was that?
Ron Artest.
Yeah, Ron Artest. Well, I said Meta World Peace, yeah, he has depression. Will Smith, ADHD, Alicia Keys, depression. Leonardo DiCaprio, OCD. Halle Berry, not Halle Berry, Kerry Washington. Yeah, eating disorder. And then that last guy, his name is J Balvin. He's a reggae artist. He lives with depression. So,
Was it Middle World, what's his name, Artest, was that the one that choked Pierre Calissimo, the coach?
did he?
No, I don't know.
Did he?
I think, that was his first.
PJ Carlos, he did?
Yeah, back when they were, he was a coach for Phoenix at the time,